Fantastic. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Alex MacIsaac, and I'm the SAMbot project coordinator at the Samara Centre for Democracy. And so today I'm going to provide you all with a quick overview of what the SAMbot project is, what it does, and I'm going to share some new findings that we have from the deployment that we did during the 2021 federal election last year. So during the past federal election, we tracked that there was an average of 551 likely toxic tweets sent to the candidates that we were tracking every hour. That's about one toxic tweet every 7 seconds. In the last 2 years, instances of candidates and elected officials at all levels of government receiving increased levels of hate and toxicity have made headlines. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service has shared that they've observed a, quote, marked increase in violent threats against politicians, and members of parliament have recently been given personal panic buttons as an additional security measure due to the increase in threats received by MPs. There's a prevailing sense within Canadian political discourse that toxicity has and is continuing to rise, but presently, aside from fragmented accounts of individual candidates and elected officials receiving hate and sharing their stories, we have very little data to quantify the online toxicity problem within Canadian political discourse. And so that's where the Samara Monitor Bot, or SAMbot for short, comes in. SAMbot's a collaboration that draws on Canadian machine learning technology from our technical partner, Areto Labs, to track toxic sentiment on Twitter during Canadian elections. So before an election happens, we search for and compile the Twitter accounts for every official candidate in an election that has an active and publicly accessible Twitter account, so that SAMbot can track the tweets that they receive. SAMbot then tracks and records every tweet during an election period where a candidate's Twitter handle is mentioned. It does this by extracting the tweet information, scoring the tweet against 7 toxicity attributes, and then storing both the tweet text and its toxicity scores in a database for later analysis. And so in addition to just tracking sentiment, SAMbot can assess whether a tweet contains elements of these toxicity attributes, such as insults, profanity, threats, identity attacks, or sexually explicit content. So in the recent federal election, just last year, SAMbot tracked 298 candidates' Twitter accounts. 296 of these were incumbent candidates, while just 2 were party leaders who were not incumbents, those being Anna-May Paul, leader of the Green Party of Canada at the time, and Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada. And so through this analysis, SAMbot allowed us to see what was really a stunning volume of toxic comments that candidates received. SAMbot analyzed over 2.5 million tweets, and over 475,000 of these tweets were labeled as likely to be toxic. So because language is so complex and context dependent, machine learning bots like SAMbot can never ensure perfect accuracy in trying to understand that context. Thus, we refer to tweets flagged as toxic by SAMbot as likely toxic tweets. This means that over the course of this 36-day election period, 1 in 6 of all analyzed tweets were likely to be toxic. And the volume of different types of toxic messages are also cause for alarm here. In this election, we tracked over 290,000 tweets labeled as containing threats, over 210,000 tweets labeled as identity attacks, and over 140,000 tweets labeled as containing sexually explicit messages. Now, a majority of all toxicity, about 70%, was directed at just these 6 party leaders. Here, you can see that among the 6 party leaders, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau received by far the highest number of tweets and highest number of likely toxic tweets among party leaders and also among any candidate. 42% of all likely toxic tweets across all candidates were directed to Trudeau. But the volume shown here doesn't tell the whole story. Looking at how toxicity is spread proportionally can help show the rate at which likely toxic tweets were received by candidates. So looking at this chart, Prime Minister Trudeau remains at the top, but unlike previously, the now former Green Party of Canada leader, Anna May Paul, is only slightly behind the Prime Minister in terms of proportion. Despite her much lower total volume of tweets, over 20% of the tweets that she received were likely toxic, meaning that for both Trudeau and for Paul, over 1 in 5 of the tweets that they received were likely toxic. And regarding party leaders, toxicity attributes can help tell the story here as well. These are the 3 most common toxicity attributes received by each of these 6 candidates. Notably, Anna May Paul once again had unique outcomes, as she was the only leader to receive identity attacks as their most common toxicity attribute, with Jagmeet Singh being the only other leader to have identity attacks crack their top 3. Now, this is just a fraction of our findings from our recently released 2021 federal election snapshot. So for more, I urge you to check out our website, SAMbot.ca, after this event for more of our findings if you're interested. And I want to share some of the factors that guided our design for this first SAMbot deployment. So we only tracked incumbents and party leaders, and this was because their information could be efficiently located and confirmed. In future deployments, we look forward to expanding our reach to include non-incumbent candidates to understand their experiences with toxicity and how they differ. Now, since it's incredibly rare for Parliament to see a balanced number of members from each party, our focus on incumbent candidates meant that a majority of our candidates were from the 2 major parties, that being the Liberal Party and Conservative parties of Canada. There was also a gender imbalance in our sample, as is the reality of political representation in Canada. We used Library of Parliament data to confirm candidates' gender. However, this data was only binary, that meaning male and female were the only options. So 210 candidates were recorded as male, while the other 88 were recorded as female. And then our sample of those 88 female candidates was also limited based on party representation. So 50 of the 88 female candidates tracked by SAMbot were incumbent candidates for the Liberal Party of Canada, meaning that, especially so among female candidates sampled, there was an additional imbalance based on party affiliation. So keeping in mind how male candidates were overrepresented, 18% of tweets we observed, 18% of tweets sent to male candidates were likely toxic versus 21% for female candidates, which we see indicates that future research into gender toxicity in the online political environment would likely be a fruitful area of further research. Additionally, due to a lack of accessible demographic data, we could not relate SAMbot toxicity data to demographic characteristics of candidates, such as their race, religion, sexual orientation, or gender beyond the binary. Although we could observe some findings surrounding race and religion through our party leader analysis, access to self-identification data would allow us to conduct large-scale analysis on these topics, which was not possible with this deployment, but we'd be interested in looking further into that in future deployments. And then finally, these findings represent just one corner of one platform of one part of Canadian politics. Twitter is just one of many online platforms where Canadians have political discussions. As of 2020, Twitter was reported as being most popular with Canadian users who were younger, those being between the ages of 18 and 34, Canadians with higher annual household incomes, and Canadians who held a college degree or higher level of education. The behavior of Twitter users who don't hold those aforementioned demographic characteristics were likely underrepresented in our findings as a result, due to our sole focus on the Twitter platform. But our aim with the SAMbot project was to just carve off a small slice of the toxic political conversation that goes on online and examine it in detail. The project is a matter of measuring the obvious. And our findings have resonated with the media, with journalists, and the wider political community, helping to validate the experiences of those who frequently face online toxicity by quantifying the toxic sentiment that's widely spread in online spaces. Now, our findings don't provide absolute or definitive conclusions about the conversation nationally, or even just within Canadian federal politics. However, we can share these high-level and accessible insights about the state of political conversation online that can potentially help drive policy and culture-based solutions by quantifying and illuminating how significant online toxicity can be. And we also wanted to model the behavior that we want to see. And thus, alongside our recently released snapshot, we published a data release, openly sharing as much of our SAMbot data as we can, while still keeping individual tweet data anonymized. Our data set breaks down toxicity by type, by candidate, and by date received. And we hope that individuals, academics, or other research organizations can use the data collected through SAMbot to derive additional insights for their own work. So as for kind of our next steps with this project, post this 2021 election, our work that we've done here is helping shape how we plan to deploy SAMbot in the future. Going forward, we want to increase our understanding about how toxicity is spread and who it's predominantly directed towards. This could be advanced through accessing self-identified demographic data from candidates. As I mentioned earlier, accessing and using this type of self-reported data at scale is a challenge, but we're keen to work with others to address this challenge, as related findings could help illuminate issues relating to representation in our democracy. SAMbot will also be deployed during upcoming municipal and party leadership elections, upcoming and ongoing municipal and party leadership elections. So stay tuned for more information on our deployments there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we recently released the SAMbot 2021 federal election snapshot. So for more findings and for access to our data release, please visit sambot.ca, and I'll throw a link into the chat in a moment as well. And then just briefly before I finish, I'd also like to share that the Samara Centre for Democracy is celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we'll be welcoming the former mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi, for our Defense in Democracy public lecture and celebration. So that'll be held on November 17th at 7 p.m. at the Toronto Reference Library. Tickets are pay what you can, and the lecture will be live streamed online for free for anyone who's interested, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat as well in a moment. So thank you very much for having me today, and thank you all for your time and attention. If you'd like more information on SAMbot after today or have suggestions for our work, please feel free to reach out to me by email or on Twitter, and I'm open for any questions that you may have right now.